So this is called Clear Path. The white heron standing so still, dignity of posture, so like the yogis in our hall, knowing somehow to draw ourselves back into the center of safety, consumed solely by the center of our own flames, burning the old stories, wishes, fears, desires, your own voice calling to yourself, only heard by yourself, back from the brink of the remembering, to this place where the white heron stands. Breath. Breathing you. Untouched by a shredded past, an incomprehensible future. Resting like the white heron, only the dignity of posture remains. Blessed by the faculties of our senses, knowing somehow there is no other world. Simply this. There is this small point, infinite point, where the world divides. One road leading back into the flames of becoming. This voice speaking too quickly, desperately searching through the crowded years, where life's hopes and fears can be played in this game of winning and probably losing. Grasping tightly, capturing, imprisoning, keeping it for all time. And then there is this other path, old path, caught in the miracle of ordinariness, bewilderment, the price of the sand slipping through your fingers, knowing somehow that you have to surrender, leaving behind the hopes and fears in this grasping, resting nowhere, falling on your knees, knowing somehow that the heart knows its way from here on. Knowing somehow that the heart knows its way from here on. So, I want to talk about this split, this infinite little place. An infinite place in time, which is the crossroads. And that crossroads, one leads to, the Buddha said, if you know my teachings, you know dependent origination. So I would like to go through the simplicity and also the complexity of the wheel of dependent origination. But it's not what I'm so interested in. What I'm interested in is the liberative wheel of dependent origination. So I'd like to first just tonight it's a rather complex piece, but I'm going to try to make it really simple. And I'll do what I can with this because there's a lot of parts to it. So the first is that, and I'll just describe these in pictures, but they actually are in that painting up there in the outer circle. And there's one above Sharon's head there that's also outer circle. And that is what holds the wheel of samsara or dependent origination. They talk about it as yama. And you see this fierce creature up there that kind of holds the wheel. And that wheel, the wheel of life. To understand this, it is really based on the past. The simplest way I can describe it is the past, the present, and the future. And what we're describing here in the first 7 pieces of this are the past. And then there's an infinitesimal point, a point where we either get it or we don't. You know. And if we don't get it, we keep turning within this Mahakal, this great creature of kind of birth and death. Yana Taka. So, in doing this, I want to just speak the past first. And I can do it somewhat in pictorial form. Might be helpful because my mind works like that. Is that the first seven, which is the past. And last night I was talking about this river of the aggregates and the karmic formation. So the way it's described, and I have to say, you know, I actually do a pretty good job of it today, but when I was quite young, in my early 20s, my teacher asked me to go and study dependent origination. So I had this little book from Wheel Publication in Sri Lanka, and I went and I was in this. I'd been in a month retreat, and I came out of it, and he said, "Well, you should do this." So I went, and the mayor of Dalhousie, India, it's about 8,000 feet, gave me this little room, and this little room was a concrete kind of bunker with this steel door, and it had bars on the window, on two windows, and just, you know, it was a small little window with bars on it. So it had a kind of certain feel to it. And I had this little book from Wheel Publications on the wheel of dependent origination. And one looked out, and they have to have bars on the windows there. It wasn't for trying to get out. It was for the monkeys trying to get in. You know. And up there in the high pine forest there in Dalhousie, they're these big Langor monkeys with these beautiful tails and sort of white faces with black sort of around their eyes and the tops of their heads. So it's just gorgeous, you know. And they're actually not very, but they stay away from people mostly, you know. But they also have what I call the red ass monkeys, and they're. If you've ever been to Kathmandu, they're kind of the, you know, they'll grab anything that, you know, looks edible, or even not. You know. So anyway, I was inside, and I tried to get this from the lists, and Buddhist lists are some of the most boring things you've ever come across. You know, it's sort of like Buddhist conferences. You know. And, you know, it's just that in this particular kind of list, though, it is imperative, in a sense, I think, to understand it. So, just to give you a pictorial piece of it, first it goes from, I just named them off here. There's ignorance, and there's a thing called karmic formations, which we talked about last night. I want to do that before I gave this talk tonight. And so we just understand some pieces of karma. And then there is consciousness. Then there is Namarupa. There has to be a mind-body. And if there's a mind-body, then there is the six senses. If there's the six senses, then there is contact, and if there's contact, there's feeling. Okay, so that actually happens from the past to now. Okay, that's the whole story. So I'll just go through this a little bit so you have an idea. The past is, first of all, in the river that's flowing, there is the fact that, you know, we're always looking at shore and trying to hold something, capture something. And so we're in this place of flowing back and forth. and there is the not understanding of how it works. So there's ignorance. And in the description up there of ignorance, there are pine trees with all the spines off of them because it's actually the trees have been poisoned. And the river is black, full of toxins because of the ignorance. And that there is an old, the pictorial piece of it is an old woman who's being led by a little 5-year-old child. She actually, and you can say that the child is kind of there's two sides of innocence. There's one kind of the beauty of innocence, and the other is the misunderstanding, the lack of wisdom, actually, some learning. So that's the kind of pictorial of ignorance itself. And due to that, and that water is toxic, is that there is the current, and the current is the karmic formation. And I spoke of that last night. That's what's arises. And if there is karmic formation, if there's water and it's flowing, then there is consciousness. And if consciousness exists, then these aggregates exist. Therefore, then there is a body, mind. And in the karmic formation, the pictorial view of that is a potter. And he has one set of pots that are broken and one set that are beautifully made. And we are this combination of broken pots and good pots in the stream, in the flow itself. Now, we also have consciousness. And consciousness in this particular languaging they have the pictorial picture is a monkey that's jumping from tree to tree, or you can say from object to object, right? Because that's what it does, when ignorance is there. So, and what is it jumping to? The 6 senses. And so they have, if the body-mind is there, which they describe as a boat with 2 people in the boat. One is paddling and one is steering. So the mind and the body, they're still in the same boat. I think you understand that. Okay. So, and then if there is a mind-body, then there is the senses. And so the senses are always described as the 5 windows and a door for the mind. Because in Buddhist psychology, the mind is just, it's not different than one of the sense doors. It has attributes. But in the sense of, from our wholeness, like the thoughts themselves, are not different than hearing, seeing, sensation, whatever. We put more emphasis on because they move differently, they are experienced differently. So you have the 6 senses. And if you have the 6 senses, and you have consciousness, this thing that's jumping from object to object, you have the world. You have contact. And so, the Tibetans did these things, so you got an arrow in the eye. Contact. They don't seem to mess around. Okay. So, and if you have contact, then you have a thing called feeling. Okay, Vedana. This is the 7th one. And it is the secret of the wheel of dependent origination, is right there. But I have to describe, I have to say, as I said in this poem I wrote, that there's an infinitesimal point, and there's two paths. And that one path has to do with the fact that due to the ignorance, and that there is the contact and the feeling, and the feeling is either pleasant, unpleasant, or we're spaced out, or neutral, whatever you want to call it there, not decisive. There are many moments of non-decisiveness, but due to the pleasantness and unpleasantness and our reaction to it, then there is a situation that we term as grasping. We either grasp the pleasant, or we're grasping to push away the unpleasant, essentially. So when that happens, and what they have is, there's a kind of somebody in like a bar drinking this Tibetan beer chong, and then the next picture is of a monkey in a tree who has a big basket full of fruit. But the thing is, the basket's all full. And he's still picking fruit and putting it in the basket, and they're just falling outside. And so the grasping then turns to a thing called clinging. Okay? And clinging then, because that moment, which is the present moment, and then you're creating the future, the grasping and the clinging then creates a becoming. Okay, so now something is going to become from that. And as soon as it becomes, then there will be birth, and then the 12th moment is actually old age, sickness and death. And then it starts over again. So this is the wheel of dependent realization. So you have the past, you have this moment, and when there is ignorance in that moment and grasping, then there's clinging, and the clinging turns to becoming. Becoming becomes, starts the thing over again, birth and old age, death. And it keeps circling around and around. That's what is called the wheel of dependent origination. And the whole thing is getting this one particular moment. It's the word vedana, and it distinctly means that there's a moment of feeling or sensation. And when sensation is there, usually what happens is we kind of have a couple moments of enjoying it, and then we either go into grasping, because we suddenly lean out and want to capture it and keep it and hold it and fondle it and do all sorts of things with it. Or we don't like it, and so then we kind of push it away and have all these strategies to dissociate or slap the thing or do something to a rejection of it. Those are the two possibilities which create the grasping. Now, I want to talk about the practice. So, do you get this? I mean, it's not really that complicated, but it's just about the past and this always possibility, this moment. And what happens when the grasping that it creates, the becoming, and the becoming just keeps this thing going. And these are habit patterns. It's fundamental here. So we come to this practice. It's so cool, because we're coming here and saying, okay, I'm going to sit down and I was going to sit down and write myself a letter. No, actually, you're going to sit down and you're going to sit in your own stew. That's real. And we kind of create this stability of mind and kind of coming back to the moment, But there's so much moving away from it and getting caught up that we start seeing how it works on some level. It can become a little bit discouraging. Watching, how you keep repeating the same foolishness over and over again. But it took a long time to make those habits. So it takes a little while. We have this idea, well, I come to spiritual practice and I'm going to just, first year or two, I just kind of, get through that. It's a long process. But you have to think of it from the river's point of view. That ignorance has been there for countless amount of time with this flow behind it. So, and we're trying to change that. It's an enormous project. And I don't know of anything, it looks so slow, but actually it's incredibly fast. It depends on how you're looking at it, It's phenomenally, I used to think, oh my God, it's going to take all this stuff. But that's not true. But it depends upon this perspective, This is from Henry David Thoreau. In the long run, you only hit what you aim at. Therefore, though you should fail immediately, you had better aim at something high. Okay? I think that's so. So, let's just kind of frame our practice here because I want to get on to this liberative wheel of dependence arising. And first, how do we not jump on the circle or bandwagon of grasping? And the practice is this capacity to use mindfulness. The Buddha called it the river stopper. Stop the river. And so I thought I would just read some of these. These are just different pieces from different teachers. And it's a little bit long, but to me it kind of gives this place that we sit when, in some ways it's so simple, we sit and there's only two things. It's either freedom or grasping. And these are just about the freedom itself. And the first one I want to read is from Ajahn Chah, which is sort of from my lineage and whatever. The Buddha saw that whatever the mind gives rise to are just transitory conditioned phenomena which are really empty. When this dawned on him, he let go and gave up and found an end to suffering. You must understand these matters according to the truth. When you know things as they are, you will see that these elements of mind are deception. In keeping with the Buddha's teachings, that this mind has nothing, does not arise, is not born, does not die with any one. It is free, shining, with nothing to occupy it. The mind becomes occupied only because it misunderstands and is deluded by these conditioned phenomena, this false sense of self. Therefore, the Buddha has us look at our minds. What exists in the beginning? Truly, not anything. This emptiness does not arise and die with phenomena. When contacting something good, it does not become good. When it contacts something bad, it does not become something bad. The pure mind knows these objects, clearly knows that they are not substantial. Okay? That's from Ajahn Chah. From the Lama, the other night I was, the Rinpoche, from Andrew Harvey's book on Journey to Ladakh. And I read a piece of this and kind of goes on, and he says, when he was talking about the fact that there was two ways of experiencing emptiness. One was, a hard way, and the other was a kind of soft way. And Andrew Harvey asked, have you felt what you are talking about? In moments. Enough to know that it is not nonsense. Not enough to live in a constant awareness of it. To meditate is to begin to understand the structure of thought, the structure of self. What is the understanding of emptiness? I can answer this question in words, but not to understand what I mean. You will have to experience it. That you can experience safely only after many years of dedicated meditation. To experience it without the background of meditation might lead to madness or worse. To understand emptiness is to understand that all things are contingent. All things are contingent. That all things arise contingently. That nothing has an absolute reality. Only a present contingent reality. It is to understand that all connections are of the mind. All notions of selfhood or personality are fictitious, created, and sustained by a mind for its own purposes. For the purpose of the ego, which is itself a fiction. It is not merely to understand these things, but to live that understanding. Okay, that's the number 6. Now, we go to Adi. And this, I love this explanation of practice. True meditation has no direction, goals, or method. All methods aim to achieve a certain state of mind. All states are limited and permanent and conditioned. Fascination with states leads only to bondage and dependency. True meditation is abstinence as primordial consciousness. True meditation appears in consciousness spontaneously when awareness is not fixed on objects of perception. When you first start to meditate, you notice that awareness is always focused on some object, on thoughts, body sensations, emotions, memories, sounds, etc. This is because the mind is conditioned to focus and contract upon objects. Then the mind compulsively interprets what it is aware of, the object, in a mechanical and distorted way. It begins to draw conclusions and make assumptions according to past conditioning. In true meditation, all objects are left to their natural functioning. This means that no effort should be made to manipulate or suppress any object of awareness. In true meditation, the emphasis is on being awareness, not on being aware of objects, but on resting as primordial awareness itself. Primordial awareness, consciousness, is the source in which all objects arise and subside. As you gently relax into awareness, into listening, the mind's compulsive contractions around objects will fade. Silence of being will come more clearly into consciousness as a welcoming to rest and abide. An attitude of open receptivity, free of any goal or anticipation, will facilitate the presence of silence and stillness to be revealed as your natural condition. Silence and stillness are not states, therefore cannot be produced or created. Silence is the non-state in which all states arise and subside. Silence is the non-state in which all states arise and subside. Silence, stillness, and awareness are not states and can never be perceived in their totality as objects. Silence is itself the eternal witness without form or attributes. As you rest more profoundly as the witness, all objects take on their natural functionality, and awareness becomes free of the mind's compulsive contraction and identification and returns to its natural non-state of presence. Isn't that lovely? Adhishanti. Adhishanti. Yeah. This is a clear path. You know, we come to this practice and we have to, we are in this, in a sense, kind of wrestling match and struggle with our habits and our fears and our needs and our, aversions. And there's also a place in the center. There's a place that this abiding exists. And it takes a very steady mind. It takes kind of the courage and the fearlessness not to follow, the liking or the disliking, but to actually rest in the center. From the Tao Te Ching, to a mind that's still, the whole universe surrenders. To a mind that's still, the whole universe surrenders. So, our practice here is to sit in that center. And the things that begin to happen as we stay, and sometimes we can't stay long, it's okay. Don't worry too much. Because the grasping is so habitual and is so built into the system that we kind of stay for a moment and then we forget. And we stay for a moment and we forget. But there is this possibility that we find this stillness, the center of beingness, And it is that I talked about the mirror, this kind of uncomplicated place where we're just kind of sitting. And in that uncomplicated place, then a series of things as we stay begin to happen. And it's called the liberative wheel of dependent origination. And the first thing that happens is we sit there and we're not being fooled and we're not messing with the objects and we're not liking them or disliking them. We're just kind of sitting in the center of it and we become aware of the Buddha's first noble truth. That the wheel itself is suffering. And it is the first insight, primary insight of liberation. So you get this sense of, oh my gosh, I can see how many times the endless cycle of repeating these, sometimes, believing, a lot of times we believe in that somehow if we get it right, we'll get happiness. And so we have to kind of recognize that we're not going to get it that way. We're not going to get it through in kind of the sense reality. That we have to actually drop back one level behind that. In this place of simple abiding. And when we do that, then what happens is we suddenly, no longer the structures that we've created, that we've depended on, hold. No discipline, no idea about spirituality, no concretized, form that looks like us in the sky or something. It all's kind of, I don't know. And it's really, I don't know. So suddenly you're sitting on this edge. You know which ways, you know you don't want to go back. Okay, because you see the nature of the wheel of dependent origination and how it works and how you keep doing this. And you go, I don't want to go there. So I'm going to just stay right here. I wonder what that's like if I just stay here. And the first thing is you're looking over a precipice into the unknowable, the unknown. And so suddenly you're saying, oh, now I'm in the river, and I'm going to go out in a little deeper water here. And my toes, they grab the sand, and you go, oh, I don't know about this, I'm not sure about this, and you're kind of like going, oh boy, how do I do this? And so what is it that takes you from the little toes grabbing in the sand to saying, okay, I'm going to go out a little far. What does it take? And in the tradition they say, oh, this is where faith is. The word translates as faith or confidence. I also think of it as, you have to begin to trust in something different than your feet on the floor, on the sand, in the sand. That you have to actually find something else to trust. And so the next kind of thing there is faith. And suddenly you're out in the water and you're like, uh-oh, what do I do now? And there is the kind of first recognition is that there's a stability that has nothing to do with your toes or the sand, the ground that you imagined. And you felt that those objects of awareness were your only refuge. So now you have, what is your refuge? Your refuge is like not knowing. Okay? And that what happens when there is not knowing and you're out in the water, you're no longer fighting the current. So a series of things begin to happen that are quite amazing. And this is because you've stayed and you've taken the risk of, stepping out into this flow without fighting it or trying to go this way or that way. You're just being carried. And in that being carried, there is, first of all, the first piece of it is, they speak of as delight. You go, oh, wow, look, Mom, no hand. And so there's a sense of delight that happens. And the mind begins to recognize that there is a kind of a support that is fundamental to this getting out farther into the stream itself. And so I'll go through these because they refer back to some things, but just what happens is the delight turns to joy. The joy turns to tranquility. The tranquility turns to happiness. And the happiness turns to concentration. So these are all from delight, joy, tranquility, happiness, concentration. These are where the mind no longer struggles with the objects. They're actually outside the objects. It's gone outside of the objects. Their absorptions, that are supporting this going out into the water. It's mysterious. It's actually quite mysterious that those experiences out there. And they are somewhat, you could say, altered from the wheel of dependent origination. So you could say they're altered. Now, at this point, the mind is very settled because it doesn't want to go backwards. And it's actually confirmed that it understands the fine sensual experience that's not in the wheel of dependent origination. No. So it's being convinced that it can go on through these states. No. And so it moves to this next piece, and it's called the vision and knowledge of the way things are. Right? So it's stable enough to see how things are. You know? And so it looks at those. I spoke last night or night before about the characteristics. It sees how things work. It sees into what's also amazing here. It sees into the subtlety of, when you're sitting and there's just, you're playing your own game with experience. It's like the camera's the focus is pretty small, very narrow. And so now we're talking about a wide angle lens that's experiencing things. Last night when I talked about the fact that we were all influencing each other, this is what we're talking about a mind that no longer is caught in its narrowness. That's maybe the best way to say it, because the self has been thinned out so much. And so it actually, when I spoke about the psychic life, that the knowledge and vision of the way things are has this expanded awareness of the kind of universal workings. So you understand things you don't know, if that makes sense to you. Things you couldn't know, but you do. And how is that possible? Well, that's possible because you stay. And your mind is steady enough to look into the universal mind, not the little mind. So with this, one begins to get a vision of how it all works, and at that point, when one begins to see that, it would seem like, oh well, what's next? What would you imagine would be next? If you really see, like your mind is so expanding. No, not yet. Actually what you see is that you see how it works. If you see how it works, then the word is disenchantment. You're no longer enchanted by the mere sense doors and the objects because you know the framework that they are in. So there is this expanded mind that is no longer caught in itself, but it sees how the thing works. And so it becomes disenchanted, they say. Now, when it becomes disenchanted, there is, at that point, then the next kind of level of it is, and this is Bhikkhu Bodhi and actually I've done Buddhadasa and Tani Sawadiko, but I don't know. I think there's a different word for this, but they use the word dispassion. Okay? And the old word they used to use was for disenchantment was disgust, by the way. So I think you'd be a little happier with the disenchantment, you know. But dispassion, and that's still the kind of the old, the translation of the, you know, maybe 40s, 50s, 30s, I don't know when. So what happens then? One sees how it works, and so there's kind of a recognition of the samsara, of the destination of all things, destination of all things. Yeah. And so there is this moving back. And all I can say is that this passion is, I mean, it doesn't really, I think, really get it. But what happens is one kind of gets how it works, and there is a kind of a dignity that says, I'm not that. I'm not that. That's not what I am. And when one gets that, and one is the disenchantment, and then this one gets, I'm not that. The mind breaks. And what we know, you can say emancipation, liberation, nirvana, kensho, moksha. These are all for the point where the consciousness itself releases all of it. And there has to be a break. Now, what's interesting, the Buddha didn't stop there. You think, oh, liberation, right? Wow, I got there. You know, I've gone through all this. Cool. He didn't say that. He said, there now has to be the knowledge of liberation. So it's not good enough just to have the experience. One has to then, in a sense, digest. So, in the sense that the couple nights ago when I talked about the factors of I can't, my brain right now. Okay. No, the factors of awakening. There's the 7 factors and 37 factors. What happens is that on that seesaw I described, it stops. It stops, it disappears. Now, it can't disappear for very long, but it disappears. You know, therefore, the consciousness and the objects neither exist. And this is what the Buddha said, this is possible. You know, this is possible. And as soon as, and it can't last very long. You know, I mean, Rumi has that line which I'm sure you've heard. How's it go? For 15 seconds, I became a slave the rest of my life. So that kind of gives you the framework. You know, it's just, you know, it's, and then it's, I always think of it as like, then it's like a water heater. You have to reset the thing. But it automatically resets itself. And then the perspective or the view is slightly different. But then there has to be the knowledge of it. And that's it's kind of interesting that it doesn't end there. And so it means that there has to be, and knowledge simply means that one begins to understand how it works. And I'll give a description from a little bit of, I always think in images, is if you had like a cone, and that cone had layers of colored sand in them that went up, and it started from a very point, and it went up in these crisscross layers, right? So these mandalas that are from the surface to our our unconscious, our subconscious, right down into the very foundation of our kind of universal stuff. And what this is, from my understanding, and this is an image I kind of came up with 30, 40 years ago, is there's a prick at the bottom of the cone, and one grain of sand falls out. And one grain of sand begins at the very bottom and begins to shift every pattern on its way up through the psyche. Right up eventually the surface. And I don't know how many, that can take years and years and years and years. Right. For it to actually make it to the surface, I find. But that one grain of sand, that deep down, which is really this liberative wheel of dependent origination, it changes the whole being, but it takes time. So there has to be an understanding of what happened, and then the understanding that it takes this, that the restructuring will happen, but we have to practice. We have to, support this from its origin. And its origin was simply the fact that when I found this place in the center, and Adi, explained as it's free, it's the stillness, and that we start recognizing we have to come back to that, and it's not about the objects anymore. We can let them go. And that we can walk around. At first, there's a knowing, and it's quite strong, that one kind of believes something out of the past. But eventually, it's no longer of the past. It begins to work its way up through. And so the idea of some comparison around it has to leave. And one then has to start living that liberation and knowing that they're doing that. From The Myth of Freedom by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. The attainment of enlightenment from ego's point of view is extreme death. The death of the self, the death of me and mine, the death of the watcher. It is the ultimate and final disappointment. The ultimate and final disappointment. No more concocting. But, here's the other thing. Out in the center of the river, there is this stillness. And that stillness is about not fighting or struggling with things, but it's actually the kind of the dance or the harmony of what's available. And if one doesn't struggle what comes up on the mirror, but simply releases what's on the mirror, why not? up on, I got to teach when I was up on Kailash on the north side. There's Milarepa's cave, and I got to teach there. I got to teach. I mean, this is like huge. Like, I don't know. It's like the ultimate teacher's dream. I mean, I taught in Milarepa's cave, on Kailash. And I taught, what I taught, it was interesting because we had all this stuff on, and the lamas there that were there, they were so happy to see us, and they took out these horns and did all this stuff and everything, It's like, it was really very magical. I sat up in the big seat, and taught, and I taught about vividness and spaciousness, I've forgotten what the third one was. But it was really about this whole thing around freedom. That if we sit in it, this is a huge world that we narrow ourselves down in, and this is a huge space that we can be very clear in. But someone that followed him, Milarepa, who was also a kind of a transient mendicant, who was a great yogi, cave dweller. His name was Shabkar. And there's an autobiography of Shabkar, which is just so moving. It's phenomenal. But I have a couple quotes from him, and I just would read them because he also was in the cave of Milarepa. Maybe less than 100 years later or so. The source of phenomena of samsara and nirvana is the true nature of one's own mind, an immense expanse that is an empty brilliance, completely free of taking things as real. This I have realized. If I look towards the one who realizes this, one's own awareness, it is like the sky, set free beyond clinging, in the unborn expanse of the ultimate nature of mind. In the unborn expanse of the ultimate nature of mind. Now that's expanse. It's another piece of them. When I stay, I have nothing to be attached to. When I leave, I have nothing to leave behind. Wherever I am, no one says, "Where have you been? Where are you going?" I, the renunciate, yogi, am happy and sing a song of joy. I have raised my head and seen the cloudless sky. It made me think of absolute, boundless space. I have felt the freedom without middle or end, free of any partial views. I have seen the world and living beings as possessing the same nature. I have seen the world and living beings as possessing the same nature. The Buddha, nature which has awoken in me, which is naturally present in all beings. I have known the state of freedom. From attraction and repulsion, from hope of reaping the fruit and the fear of failure, I have let go. Isn't that beautiful? I have let go. Clear path. The white heron, standing so still, dignity of posture, so like the yogis in our hall, knowing somehow to draw ourselves back back into the center of safety, consumed solely by the center of our own flames. Burning of the old stories, wishes, fears, desires, your own voice calling to yourself, only heard by yourself. Back from the brink of the remembering, to this place where the white heron stands, breath breathing you. Untouched by the shredded past, an incomprehensible future resting like the white heron. Only the dignity of the posture remains. Blessed by the faculties of our senses, knowing somehow there is no other world than this, simply this. There is this small point, infinite point, where the world divides. There is this small point, infinite point, where the world divides. One road leading back into the flames of becoming. This voice speaking too quickly, desperately searching through the crowded years, where life's hopes and fears can be played in this game of winning and probably losing. Grasping tightly, captured, imprisoning, keeping it for all of time. And then there's this other path, old path, caught in the miracle of ordinariness. The price of the sand slipping through our fingers, knowing somehow that you have to surrender, leaving behind the hopes and the fears in grasping, resting nowhere. Falling on your knees, knowing somehow that the heart knows its way from here on. Falling on your knees, knowing somehow that the heart knows its way from here on.